Okay, let's just sit quietly for a few more minutes and try to really make sure our mind is in a good state for what we're going to do for the next hour and a half, learning about Buddha's teachings and in particular how to help us in dealing with the situation of death and dying, both in ourselves and also in the world around us. So really try to make sure that you have the wish to be of benefit to yourselves, to others, to the world, and that that's your reason, your motivation for being here. So we're starting a course called Peaceful Living, Peaceful Dying. And I think this is the third time I've taught this course here at Sravasti Abbey. I taught it last year and also in 2019, but I've also taught it in many other places as well. And normally I teach the course using this little booklet that I wrote many years ago. I think it's called Preparing for Death and Helping the Dying. And there's a PDF of that booklet on the Abbey website. You can download that if you want. You might already have it though if you attended last year's course or the course or the year before. Um, and I won't be using that booklet this year, but you can read it on your own. It's pretty easy to read, and most of it is self-explanatory. And if you have any questions about any of the material you read in that booklet, you can send your questions in and I'll try to answer them. But this year, I wanted to do something a little different. And in our library here, there's many books on death and dying. I haven't read all of them, but most of them are from the Tibetan tradition. And there is a lot of material in the Tibetan tradition about death and dying and so on. But then I saw this book, which is called Mindfully Facing Disease and Death, Compassionate Advice from Early Buddhist Texts by Bhikkhu Analayo. He's a German monk and quite a scholar, amazing scholar. I've read some of his other books. He did one on the Satipatthana Sutra, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness, another on rebirth, looking into the sutras, the early sutras, and what the Buddha said about rebirth and so on. And I also just thought it would be really nice to read things from the early Buddhist texts, like the Buddha himself, what the Buddha himself said about death and dying. And so there's lots of translations of sutras in here. And some of them are stories. A person is very sick or close to death or has already died, and just things that the Buddha and his disciples like Shariputra say about death and dying. So I thought to share some of these with you. We don't have time to go through all of them, but do as many as we can. But before getting into that, I thought to start by talking about fear, exploring the topic of fear and how to deal with it. Um, I think some people are so uncomfortable about the whole topic of death and dying that um, they don't want to hear about it. They're really uncomfortable, frightened to hear about it, to think about it, to talk about it, and so on. And so that can be an obstacle and hindrance to exploring this whole topic of death and dying. I suppose anyone who's in that situation wouldn't be here, wouldn't be joining this course. No, I don't want to. I don't want to do a course about death and dying. But still, those of us who are joining this course probably do experience some feelings of fear about death and dying, and so it's important to know how to deal with that particular state of mind, because the Buddha said we do need to have a realistic attitude and a courageous attitude with regard to death and dying, be willing to look at it and actually remember it, keep it in mind, have mindfulness of death and dying, the fact that we are mortal beings, we're not going to live forever, and in fact, death could happen any time. So we're encouraged to keep these thoughts, these awarenesses in our mind. And there's reasons for that, which will become more clear as we go along. I mean, mainly the reason is so that we're prepared for it. Because often people are so uncomfortable with the whole topic of death and dying that they avoid it. They don't want to hear about it or talk about it, or think about it. And then they get to the end of their life and there it is, staring them in the face. And they've never learned how to manage, how to deal with that kind of situation. So then it becomes very difficult to die with a calm, peaceful state of mind. That's from the Buddhist point of view, and I think the same is true in all religious and spiritual traditions. The most important thing is at the time of death to be in a state of mind that's calm, peaceful, and then if you are a religious practitioner, religious believer, to be able to remember your religious beliefs and practices and do those as you're dying. So that's the ideal. But to be able to do that, we need to prepare ourselves while we're alive. We need to train ourselves really well so that we can have those thoughts and feelings in our mind as we're dying. And so that's the main reason from the Buddhist point of view, and I'm sure from all other religious and spiritual traditions' point of view, that's the reason why it is important to contemplate death and dying. I think I was raised Catholic, although I kind of left that behind when I was still pretty young. But it's considered important in that tradition as well. I remember seeing photographs of a monastery somewhere in the Middle East, and they actually have skulls of the former monks, the monks who had been living in that monastery and then died. They actually preserve their skulls and have I think they're like under the altar, or they actually have an old altar of all these skulls piled up. They're right there out in the open for the monks to keep that awareness in mind that that's where I'm headed. That's going to happen to me one day as well. So some people would think, ooh, that sounds, morbid or depressing or whatever, but it doesn't have to be. Death can actually be a wonderful experience, a beautiful experience. It doesn't have to be something scary and painful and depressing. It all depends on our mind and how we work with our mind. And that's the whole point. So that's what we'll be exploring in this weekend, how to work with our minds so that we can at least have calm, positive state of mind at the time of death, even if we don't feel happy about it, but at least we can manage it. And yeah, maybe even get to the point where we can have some happiness about death and dying. So, fear is a natural experience. It's understandable. So, anybody who does feel fear of death shouldn't be ashamed of it. I think people do sometimes feel shame with regard to fear, and that may be more the case with males than with females. I don't know how it is nowadays, but when I was growing up as a kid, there was a sense that boys had to be strong and courageous and shouldn't show fear. If a boy or a man shows fear, then they are weak. They were called a chicken. I don't know why chicken. Maybe because chickens get really, anxious about things. But it was considered bad, shameful for a male to show fear, whereas it was okay for females. We have the movies with the damsels in distress. Help me, help me. So it was okay for us to show fear, but not for men. Maybe that's changed now. But anyway, if we've ever picked up that kind of message that that fear is shameful, we shouldn't be afraid, we should be courageous. And so that might cause us to be in denial of our fear, and that doesn't help. Doesn't help to deny it. If there is fear in the mind, we should acknowledge it. We should be honest, open, accepting of it, and work with it. There are things we can do to work on our fear. So in traditional Buddhist teachings, in my experience, I haven't encountered much discussion about fear and how to work with fear. So I thought to share some things from a book called Buddha's Brain. There's a whole section in there about fear, dealing with fear. So Buddha's Brain is a book by Rick Hanson, who's a neuropsychologist, so he knows all about the brain. And he's also a meditator and a teacher of meditation, mainly Vipassana, I believe, insight meditation. So the book is really nice because he talks about the brain and how the brain works in really simple language. Normally, I get totally turned off when I try to read something about the brain, all these complicated terms. But he explains it in really simple, practical, down-to-earth terms. And he also talks about meditation. So he kind of weaves together Buddhist ideas with neuroscience and neuropsychology and so on, in the sense that when we get stressed, worried, upset, angry, and so on and so forth, there's things going on in our brain and things going on in our body, and nobody likes those kind of feelings. And the practice of meditation and other practices from the Buddhist tradition can help us to be less stressed, more calm, more happy, have better relationships with others, and so on. So he's kind of pointing that out, showing how Buddhist practices actually help with these physiological or psychological problems. So anyway, that's generally what the book is about. And in chapter 5, there's a section entitled Feeling Safer. So these are ways we can deal with fear, anxiety. So I'll just read some of the sections from the book and methods for how we can do this, how we can actually feel safer. And I really feel, with my knowledge of Buddhism, that this is compatible. This is not at all contradictory. Okay, so as he says, as we saw in chapter 2, the brain continually scans your inner and outer worlds for threats. When any are detected, your stress response system flares up. Occasionally, this vigilance is warranted, but usually it's excessive, driven by amygdala hippocampus reactions to past events that are no longer likely. So in other words, we had some bad experience before and that left some impression there in our brain, and then we see something else that triggers that off, and here's another scary experience. The anxiety that results is unnecessary and unpleasant, and it primes your brain and body to overreact to small things. Does that sound familiar? Additionally, vigilance and anxiety draw attention away from mindfulness and contemplative absorption. It's no accident that traditional instructions for meditation often encourage practitioners to find a place of seclusion where they are protected from harm. That's true. In the teachings on calm abiding, they say, very important to find a place where you feel safe. There's no dangers around as much as possible. For example, the account of the Buddha's night of awakening has him sitting at the base of the Bodhi tree, which has his back. Feelings of safety tell the brain that it can afford to bring in the troops that have been manning the watchtowers and put them to work internally to increase concentration and insight, or just let them get some rest. So it's true, if we're scared and anxious, it's difficult to really focus on our practice, our internal work. But before we explore specific methods for feeling safer, 2 important points. First, in ordinary reality, there is no such thing as complete safety. Life is continually changing. Cars run red lights, people get sick, and whole nations erupt and send shockwaves around the world. There is absolutely no stable ground, no perfect shelter. Accepting this truth is wisdom, and embracing it and getting on with life can feel exhilarating. So this is completely in line with Buddhism, which explains that we are in a situation called samsara, cyclic existence. So as long as we are not enlightened, we haven't attained Buddhahood or nirvana, but we're still in samsara, cycling through death and rebirth and under the control of our karma and afflictions. As long as we're in this situation, we're never 100% safe. There's no perfect, peaceful, safe place anywhere in samsara. It's just the nature of samsara to experience problems. And even the highest realm in samsara is called the peak of samsara, like the penthouse of samsara. It's in the formless realm. So there you don't even have a body, you don't get physically sick or have pain or any kind of physical problems. You have a very long life and it's very peaceful. Your mind isn't constantly disturbed by negative thoughts and feelings. But the clock is ticking. So you're only there for a certain amount of time. It's a long time, but it's running out. Your karma to be in that situation is running out moment by moment, day by day, and so on. And eventually, it comes to an end. That existence comes to an end, and you have to die, and your mind leaves that situation and goes to another one. The only place to go from there is down. So any other place is going to be less peaceful, less blissful, less wonderful than that. So this is the situation in samsara. There are times when we have peace and happiness and things are going really well. And they may last like that for a while, maybe a few seconds, a few minutes, a few hours, a few days. But eventually, sooner or later, things change and fall apart. And we find ourselves in a different situation. That's just the nature of samsara. And the Buddha, pointed this out in his very first teaching on the Four Noble Truths. And explain that fortunately there is a way out, there is a solution to this situation. There is an alternative to samsara, enlightenment and liberation, nirvana. So we don't have to be in samsara forever. And the Buddha taught the way out. So we're very fortunate that we had a chance to learn these teachings. It's not easy, and it probably takes time to get used to this idea that we are in this very imperfect situation, samsara, cyclic existence, where there's no permanent peace and happiness, and we experience problems again and again and again. So there's no absolute safety anywhere in samsara. But the more we think about it and get used to the idea, the more we come to accept it. And as he says, when we can accept the reality of our situation, then that discomfort will pass. Yeah, so that's one point he's making, is there's no absolute safety, absolute place where we can be free of fears and dangers as long as we're in samsara. So it's relative. So that's why he says feeling safer rather than safe. And then he goes on to say, second, for some people, especially those with a history of trauma, reducing anxiety can seem threatening, since lowering their guard makes them feel vulnerable. For these reasons, we speak of safer rather than safe. And please adapt the methods that follow to your own needs. So each person has their own individual situation and experience and needs to work with fear and anxiety in a way that works for them. So he's giving a number of different methods, and some of them may be applicable to you, but some of them may not. So he's giving the encouragement to find your own way. So one method for working with fear and anxiety is to relax the body. He says, relaxation drains away anxiety like pulling the plug in a bathtub. And earlier in the chapter, he explained some methods to relax. One is a kind of body scan, going through the body and relaxing it part by part. This is done in yoga. I think they call it yoga nidra. There it's usually done from the feet up. You start with your feet and you go up to the top of the head. But you can also go the other way around. I kind of like doing it that way, going from the top down. So either way, whatever way you want to do it. But just going through the body, depending on how much time you have, you can do it in 1 minute or 5 minutes or 10, 20, whatever. And, just notice tension in the body and then release it, relax it. And I think if you get used to doing that, you can do it more quickly. If you've done it a while, then just in a few seconds you can be more relaxed. And another method is working with the breath. He calls it big exhalation. So this involves breathing in as much as you can and then breathing out slowly. Not just in a rush, but a slow, long, slow exhalation. That actually does something to your body, to your nervous system. And it stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relaxed response, as opposed to the other one, which is that one? Sympathetic nervous system. That's the fight or flight one. So this actually does activate the relaxed response. And I tried it once. I really had to. I was in this very stressful situation. I was in Israel, and I was driving a car. And I hadn't driven for many years, maybe like 20 years. I hadn't really driven a car, so I was really out of shape with driving. And then I was in Tel Aviv, which is a super big, busy, crazy city. And some people in Israel drive like maniacs. I mean, they just go as fast as they can. And if there's no passing lane, they'll come right up behind you and you feel like they want to just run over you. And yeah, it was very stressful. So, a few times I just found myself just like my body just felt like solid iron. I was so tense. And one time in particular, I really felt like I was about to have a panic attack. And I didn't want to have a panic attack while driving. I mean, that would be disaster. So I did this, I talked to myself. I said, you're going to be okay. You can do this. And I was doing this breathing, long breath in and long, slow breath out. And it really did work. It really did help me to calm down. So I recommend that. um, yeah, so it's very helpful if you find yourself, even one breath, even one deep breath, slow exhalation, you'll probably find it does calm you down, help you deal with fear and anxiety. Another method is mindfulness of the body. So just paying attention to our body, the sensations in our body, has that effect of becoming more calm, more focused. And another one he mentions, which I thought was interesting, touching your lips. You ever heard of that one? Touching the lips stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. Some people do that. Well, check it out and try it out and see what. Yeah, you can do that in a business meeting, and nobody would know. And another method I've learned, not from this book, but elsewhere, is if you're feeling kind of stressed in your body, the stress may be in certain parts of your body, maybe your chest or your abdomen or whatever. So try to find a place in your body that doesn't feel stressed, doesn't feel traumatized. Maybe your feet, if you're standing or sitting and you have your feet on the floor, just put your attention there on your feet. They probably don't feel stressed. And the floor underneath, the ground underneath, feels very solid and supportive. Or your legs, your buttocks on your chair or on your cushion. You probably don't have stress there. And again, paying attention to that place can give you a sense of feeling supported. So that can be really helpful. Just take your attention away from the place in your body where there's a feeling of stress or fear or anxiety, and put it on some other part of your body that doesn't feel that way and that may even feel supported, stable. So these are some methods that we can use that are helpful just on the physical sense if there's a sense of fear or anxiety in our body. Another method is using imagery. He says, right hemisphere imagery is closely connected with emotional processing. To feel safer, visualize protective figures with you, such as a beloved grandmother or guardian angel. So in our tradition, we would visualize Tara or Buddha or, whoever is our favorite Buddha figure. Or imagine that you're surrounded by a bubble of light, like a force field. In ticklish situations, I'll sometimes remember Captain Kirk's voice. Shields up, Scotty. And there was a time when I was feeling quite unsafe, and I found it really helpful to imagine myself surrounded by a bubble of Buddhas. Not just one Buddha, but many Buddhas all around me. I mean, they do say that. They say there's lots of Buddhas around us all the time. So I imagine completely above and below and behind and all around, like a bubble completely surrounding me. And that was really helpful to feel more safe and protected. So whatever works, some kind of visual image, mental image. This is a mental image that can help you feel more safe. Next one is connect with people who support you. Identify friends and family who care about you and try to spend more time with them. When you're apart, visualize being with them and take in the good feelings. Companionship, even if only imagined, activates the brain's attachment and social group circuitry. Physical and emotional closeness to caregivers and other members of the band was a necessity for survival during our evolutionary history. Consequently, activating a felt sense of closeness will probably help you feel safer. And that reminds me of something I read once about when people are like suffering from a serious illness like cancer, and on the way to recovery, trying to recover from that. Um, they actually did some research and found that, like in America, there's a lot of Latino, like Puerto Rican families, and people of that group had a better rate of recovery than other Americans, like white Americans. And they think it's because of the closeness, the family and friends were just so close to each other. So if somebody was ill, the family and friends would spend a lot of time with them and bring them things and so on. Whereas white Americans tend to be more distant, not so close with even within our family. So people were left more isolated while they were trying to recover from illness. And they could see that that really did make a difference. Having people around you who were there for you, showing you love and kindness, and just that emotional closeness. Then, next one is bring mindfulness to fear. So, this is a more traditional Buddhist technique. Anxiety, dread, apprehension, worry, and even panic are just mental states like any other. Recognize fear when it arises. Observe the feeling of it in your body. Watch it try to convince you that you should be alarmed. See it change and move on. Verbally describe to yourself what you're feeling to increase frontal lobe regulation of the limbic system. Notice how the awareness which contains fear is itself never fearful. I'm not sure what he means there, but I guess he means if there's fear or anxiety or whatever, and awareness is like a different state of mind. It's stepping back, standing back, and observing it. And that awareness isn't fearful. That awareness is like neutral and more calm and neutral and just observing what's going on. Keep separating from the fear. Settle back into the vast space of awareness through which fear passes like a cloud. So this is definitely very, very helpful to understand that fear, anxiety, any of those types of experiences are just thoughts. It's just a bunch of thoughts. And thoughts are impermanent, transitory. The Buddhist analogy is they are like clouds in the sky, coming and going. They appear, move, change, and eventually disappear. So we need to practice mindfulness to get to where we can do that. But if we practice mindfulness in more calm situations, like in meditation, we develop that tool, that ability to be able to observe what's happening in our mind. And then even if we are in a frightening situation, we have that tool ready and can use it to step back. And actually one thing I find really helpful is to say to myself, instead of I am fear, this or I am afraid, this is what the mind is usually saying, I am afraid, identifying with the fear, but to just say to myself, there is fear in my mind. It's a much more accurate description of what's going on. Fear, like he says, is just thoughts. feelings. There may be sensations in the body, but it's coming from the mind, starting in the mind. So being able to be objective about it, take a step back and observe it. That itself will take some of the energy out of it rather than fueling it, adding more fuel to the fire and making it bigger and bigger. Because there's a lot of thoughts going on when we're afraid. And most of the thoughts are not realistic, not helpful. So being able to take a step back and look at them and have a more objective view and a more rational view, we can probably see there's a lot of exaggeration going on. We'll do a meditation on this a little bit later and see how we can work with that. But yeah, mindfulness, just mindfulness itself can be very, very helpful. Okay, then next is be realistic. Draw on prefrontal capacities to evaluate. What is the chance that the feared event will happen? How bad would it be? How long would the damage last? What could I do to cope? Who could help me? So I was really happy to come across this because this is actually something I learned to do on my own many years ago when I was a brand new nun and I had to give my very first Dharma talk at Kopan Monastery. And I was terrified. I wanted to do it, but then as the time was getting closer, I got more and more, anxious. And it was so unpleasant, so uncomfortable. I thought, I have to do something about this. So I just sat down and looked at my mind and asked myself, why am I feeling this way? What is going on in my mind? And I could see that my mind was not deliberately, but just on its own, was creating all these worst case scenarios, that I would get up there in front of this group of people and just go blank, freeze, not be able to think of anything, and just look like an idiot. Or I would be able to say something, but it would be all messy and jumbled and not make any sense and stupid. And then, of course, the people would think, oh, she's an idiot. She doesn't know anything, and, have all these negative thoughts. So this is the eighth worldly dharma of reputation. I want to look good. I want to do a good job. I don't want people to think badly of me. So it was so strong, so powerful. So then I did this kind of like reality check, just being more realistic. And I asked myself these questions. Is it definite that that is going to happen? Am I definitely going to make a mess of things and make a fool of myself and everybody will think I'm an idiot? Is that 100% definite? And I thought, well, no, maybe not. Maybe it won't happen like that. Maybe I'll be able to do the talk okay and people will be happy with it. And there are things I can do. I realize there are things I can do to prepare myself for the talk. Like think about beforehand what I'm going to say, write it down, make notes. Then even, my mind goes blank. I can just look at my notes and remember what I wanted to say. And then I also thought that people are generally nice and not nasty. There's some nasty people. Sometimes people do nasty things. But I thought in that kind of situation, a group of people who came to Kopan Monastery to learn Buddhism, they're probably nice people. At least trying to be nice people. So if they see this young nun, looking obviously very shy and very insecure and unsure of herself and maybe, giving her very first Dharma talk. And even if I don't do such a good job, they'll probably be kind and, not throw eggs and tomatoes at me and say nasty things. So I realized that my mind was grossly exaggerating and creating these scenarios that probably wouldn't happen. And I thought, yeah, and even if they do happen, so what? It's not the end of the world. Sometimes we imagine if that were to happen, I would have to die. I hope the earth opens up and swallows me up and I never appear again. But this is exaggeration. Life goes on. You can survive these disasters. So when I came across this in his book, I thought, yeah, this is the method that I found, and it's very helpful, and I do often teach it to others. So he goes on to say, most fears are exaggerated. As you go through life, your brain acquires expectations based on your experiences, particularly negative ones. Yeah, because he says in this book that the way the brain works, it pays more attention to negative experiences than positive ones. Even says, what is it? Negative information and experiences are like Velcro. The brain is like Velcro when it comes to the negative stuff, but the positive stuff is like Teflon. It just slides off. So check it out. I mean, this is definitely my experience. You remember the bad stuff. You focus on the bad stuff. And the good stuff is like, yeah, it's there, but it's not that important. I don't know. Maybe not everyone's the same, but when I talk about this, people often, oh yeah, that's how I am. So anyway, when situations occur that are even remotely similar to negative experiences, your brain automatically applies its expectations to them. If it expects pain or loss, or even just the threat of these, it pulses fear signals. But because of the negativity bias, many expectations of pain or loss are overstated or completely unfounded. So his advice with this is try to see the world clearly without distortion, confusion, or selective attention. What are the facts? Science, business, medicine, psychology, and contemplative practice are all founded on the truth of things, whatever it may be. In Buddhism, for example, ignorance is considered the fundamental source of suffering. Not surprisingly, studies have shown that appraising a situation more accurately leads to greater positive emotions and fewer negative ones. And if there really is something to worry about, deal with it as best as you can. For example, pay the bill, see the doctor. Yeah, so instead of just sitting there and worrying, creating all these worst case scenarios in our mind, do something. Do something. If there is something that can be done, do it. Like Shantideva. I love that verse from Shantideva. He talks about it more in terms of being upset, but I think it can apply to worry and fear. There's no point in just sitting around being worried and afraid and anxious. That doesn't do any good. It just makes you feel worse. And if there's something that can be done about it, do it. If there's nothing that can be done, just accept. In either case, worrying doesn't help. Just makes things worse. Not only will doing something and moving forward feel better in its own right, it will also usually improve a situation that's worrying you. Let's do a meditation on this. This is a very helpful practice to do when we're feeling frightened, worried. So I'm going to ask you to bring to mind something that you are worried about, but maybe if you've never done this before, don't choose your biggest fear, like fear of death, if that's a huge one for you. You can think of something smaller, more manageable, like maybe there's something coming up that you have to do, you're involved in, and you might be worried that it may not go well, you may not do a good job, or somebody else might not do a good job, or whatever. Okay, so you could choose a situation like that. And then we'll do this kind of reality check. So Sit comfortably. You can let your eyes close all the way or leave them open a little bit. Try to sit up straight. That helps the mind to be more alert and focused. Let your body relax. If you are feeling any tension anywhere in your body, try to relax the tension. You could try the deep breathing. Breathing in slowly and then breathing out a long, slow breath. See if that helps your body to be more relaxed. So now think of something that you have some fear, worry, anxiety about. Again, choose a small or medium sized fear rather than a really huge one. Once you've thought of what you'd like to focus on, allow it to come into this clear spaciousness of your mind. Try not to get all caught up in it, and instead try to activate your mindful awareness so that you can stand back from the fear and observe it objectively. Then ask yourself, what exactly is it that you are afraid of? Why do you have this fear? And then, once you've had a better understanding of that, check if it's reasonable for you to have this fear. Is it 100% definite that what you're afraid of will actually happen? Or is it just a possibility? And maybe your mind is getting carried away with unrealistic fantasies? And if you discover that there's some possibility that what you dread might happen, then check if there's anything you can do to prevent it from happening or prepare yourself if it does happen, how you can be better prepared so that it doesn't have to be overwhelming and unbearable. So, if you find that there are things you can do to prevent or prepare yourself for this dreaded event, then make the decision to do those things. At least start working towards that. We might discover that there's nothing that can be done to avoid that dreaded event. And even if we tried to prevent it, we wouldn't be able to. Another thing that can help is turning to other people for help, for support, advice, guidance, strength. And there are people who care about us and who would be happy to help us out in dealing with difficult situations. It can also be helpful to contemplate that other people have been through that experience and managed to survive and be okay. So if they did it, we can do it too. So that's a method you could try when you find yourself feeling frightened, worried, anxious about something. And you might need to do it a couple of times to answer all those questions. I need more time. Maybe I didn't give you enough time to do it, but I think it can be very helpful. Okay, there's just a couple more methods here, and then I'll stop and let people ask questions. So the next method he mentions in the book is finding refuge. Does that sound familiar? So he says, in this life, where have you found refuge? Refuges include people, places, memories, ideas, and ideals. Anyone or anything that provides reliable sanctuary and protection, so you can let your guard down and gather strength and wisdom. As a child, refuge might have been your mother's lap, reading in bed, or hanging out with friends. Personally, I spent a lot of time in the hills around my home, clearing my head and getting refueled by nature. Today, as an adult, your refuge might be a particular location or activity, a church or temple, a quiet walk with your dog, a long bath, or the company of your mate, good friends, or perhaps a teacher. So in Buddhism, we talk about the objects of refuge, the three jewels, Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. But it usually takes a while to understand what the three jewels are, what their qualities are, how they can help us, and generate that feeling of confidence that they are there, I can turn to for help. For some people, it may happen very quickly and easily, but others, it may take more time, especially if we're not, most of us don't come from a Buddhist background. We come to Buddhism when we're already adults. And we may have had other experiences in our life that make it difficult for us to feel trust and confidence in another religion and religious teachings and so on. So there could be difficulties to get to the point where we really feel strong refuge. So there could be other things that can be an easier refuge, like nature. Many people find going into nature That was my experience as a child. I loved being in trees. We had a tree house in our backyard. That was my refuge. I'd go up there and just sit in the middle of the tree, far away from the family and everything going on in the house. And yeah, so nature is a very helpful refuge, and we're so fortunate here that we have so much nature. But everyone, is different, and so different people find different things. As long as it's something healthy, taking refuge in drugs, alcohol, even food can be dangerous. You can end up being overweight. So some people take refuge in things that aren't very helpful and may even make things worse. So ideally, we try to find something that's healthy and good for us and wholesome and really does help us to feel safer, feel more happy. Taking refuge pulls you away from reactivating situations and concerns and then fills you with positive influences. As you rest increasingly in a background sense of refuge, neurons are quietly stitching a safety net for you. On the path of awakening, it's natural to experience some upheaval, dark nights of the soul, or unnerving groundlessness when the foundation of old belief falls away. At these times, your refuges will catch you and help you ride out the storm. That's really true. We have a strong sense of refuge, and even when things get difficult, challenging, we can return to that sense of refuge. Try to take refuge in one or more things every day. This can be formal or informal, verbal or nonverbal, whatever works best for you. Experiment with different ways to experience refuge, such as the sense that the refuge is where you come from, or that it flows through you. So like in Buddhism, we say, ultimate refuge is actually our own Buddha nature. The ultimate teacher, the ultimate guru is our own Buddha nature right here inside of us, our natural qualities of wisdom and compassion and so on, potential for transforming our mind and bring our mind to enlightenment. So that means it's with us 24 hours a day. Even if our teacher isn't always nearby, or even if we're in a city and we can't escape to the forest, if we know how to take inner refuge in our own Buddha nature, then wherever we are, it's there. And I'd like to share one last thing. This isn't from Buddha's brain, but from His Holiness. It's actually a book called The Art of Happiness by Howard Cutler, who's a psychologist and has these different talks, talking about different topics with the Dalai Lama. And there was one part where he talked about fear and how this is a very common problem for Western people. I don't remember all the details, but anyway, he asked the Dalai Lama if he ever feels afraid when he has to go in front of tens of thousands of people and give a talk. I mean, for many people, that would be absolutely terrifying. I heard some people are more afraid of that than death. Speaking in public is terrifying. And the Dalai Lama said, yes. Hard to believe, but anyway. But then he went on to say, I realize, the fear is because I'm worried about doing well and what people will think of me. And so I'm more focused on me. And so to deal with that, I focus on them. I focus on the people in the audience that I'm going to be speaking to and generate the wish that I will do something beneficial. I would say something beneficial for them. May this talk be helpful for those people. And he said, that gives me courage. Compassion, altruism, wanting to help others gives courage. And I've heard him say that before as well. Compassion brings courage. And Howard Cutler said that he shared this advice with one of his patients who was a young man who was horribly shy. he wanted to talk to girls and invite them out for dates, but he was just terrified. Probably also wanted, fear of being rejected. And so Howard Cutler, um, told this young man about what the Dalai Lama said, and he tried it out. The young man tried it out. Next time he wanted to talk to a girl and ask a girl out, and it worked. It helped him. And it's true. If we're so focused on me, and what will they think of me? Will I look good? Will I do a good job? It's just, but turning away from me to the other person, I want to do something good for them. I want to make them happy, make them feel good. So that itself cools down that ego-centered fear and anxiety. And yeah, it does bring tremendous courage. So those are a whole bunch of methods, a whole bunch of tools. You got a toolbox now you can try out. And I find it really helpful to have different tools because in different situations, one might work better than another. So it's nice to try different things and hopefully find one that works in different situations. Any questions?
I just had a comment about refuges, the refuges people turn towards. And I think nowadays it might be the racial identities. People take refuge in their, color of their skin or their group, and, because they're confused and afraid. And so that could explain the rise of white nationalism, things like that.
But maybe that's also this whole thing about, like you mentioned here, connectedness with people that support us. I mean, it is a refuge when you're with people who think the same way you do, have the same thoughts and feelings and experiences, who are like you. It does feel more comfortable than being with a bunch of people who have very different thoughts and feelings and experiences and so on and so forth. You feel like an outsider with them. So it's kind of a natural reaction that we feel more comfortable with our group. But I mean, one of the meditations I find so helpful in Buddhism is the one we do with equanimity, or equalizing self and others, where we try to break down those barriers of us and them and feel, okay, yeah, maybe, we have different colored skins and different languages and different ways of talking and eating and, differences. Instead of focusing on those, to focus on the things we have in common, that we're human beings. Yeah, all human beings. And in fact, all living beings, animals too. We all basically are trying to be happy and trying to avoid suffering, trying to have good experiences and avoid bad experiences. So putting more emphasis on the commonality, the common denominator, the common ground that we all have as human beings and as living beings, then we can feel comfortable with anybody, even with a group of people of a different race or different religion or different political party. I'm not sure. I went into a demonstration of people who were on the opposite side of the politics than myself, if I would be able to. But yeah, if you really thought that way, if you trained yourself to think that way and feel that way, then you would be able to do that. Any others?
Someone seems to be saying that they're not afraid of dying, but how to approach death in that case?
Yeah, I know sometimes people say they're not afraid of death. And it may be true for some people, but in other cases, it might actually be denial. There's a quotation from one Tibetan master who said, people often make the mistake of being frivolous about death and think, oh, well, death happens to everyone. It's not a big deal. It's natural. I'll be fine. That's a nice theory until one is dying. And I used to feel when I was young, I thought I wasn't afraid of death. And then I was in an earthquake in Nepal, pretty strong earthquake. And then I saw very clearly that I was terrified of death, totally unprepared for death. So it's good to explore that, you know. I mean, people like race car drivers and, you know, and these people who go up to these places, really high places, and take selfies. Oh my God. I mean, they fall sometimes. So I just wonder, as they're falling, are they afraid or not? They probably thought they weren't afraid of death when they climbed up to that high point, but when, you know, they're actually falling, are they feeling everything's fine? Hard to believe. um, so that's one thing to check. You know, is it true? Is it realistic? This idea, I'm not afraid of death. So, how to approach death if you think you're not afraid of death? That was the question. Yeah. Well, I recommend really checking that out carefully. It's difficult though. It's difficult to know how we're really going to feel until it's right there. But if you, you know, sometimes we do have these close calls with death, almost in a car accident, or you're on a plane and, you know, it starts shaking, you run into a storm. So in those kind of situations, that's a good chance to see, am I really ready to die? Am I really ready for death? Am I really calm in the face of death? No fear at all. Not that I'm recommending you put yourself in those situations. Sometimes they just happen naturally. Um, but nevertheless, whether one is afraid of death or not, the real point in Buddhism and in other spiritual traditions is to prepare ourselves for that situation. And the meaning of preparing ourselves for death is learning ways of working with our mind so that we can be in a good state of mind, a positive state of mind. Because when I check myself, when I ask myself this question, why am I afraid of death? I know I am. I have no doubt that I have fear of death. But what I'm afraid of, what I'm actually afraid of, is mainly an uncontrolled mind, the mind freaking out. Because that's what happened when I was in this earthquake. My mind just froze. Panic, sheer panic. I didn't know what to do. And I was terrified. So I don't want that to happen. I don't want to die in a state of fear or in a state of attachment, which many people have, you know, oh, I don't want to leave behind these people, these things, my body. Attachment, clinging to what you're leaving behind. I don't want to have that in my mind. I don't want to have anger. Sometimes people die with anger, especially if death is caused by somebody else. Somebody shot you or did something to cause death. Or angry at the doctors because you feel like they're not doing a good job. So that I don't want negative thoughts in my mind at the time of death. I want to have positive thoughts and feelings and experiences at that time. So that's what I'm afraid of, an uncontrolled negative mind at the time of death. And there's something we can do about that. That's what I'm trying to do in my life, is make myself as familiar as possible with positive states of mind, living my life in a positive way, learning to overcome negative states of mind, and so on. So there's lots of things you can do, whether you're afraid of death or not. There's lots of things you can do to prepare yourself to be able to have a good death, a death with a positive state of mind, not caught up in some disturbing, negative, painful thoughts and experiences. So that's what you can do to prepare for death. So we'll talk more about that as we go on. So we've come to the end of this session, and I was planning to talk about the 9-point death meditation, but who's leading the meditation next? Are you going to lead that? Yeah, I think so. So, in the Tibetan tradition, at least in the Lamrim, and there's a meditation on death um, called a 9-point meditation on death, and it's divided into 3 main points, each of which has 3 subpoints, and then there's a conclusion for each of the 3 sections. So I thought in the next meditation session, you could do the meditation on the first of the 3 main points, which is the certainty of death or the inevitability of death, just to get a sense that this is definitely something that's on the horizon, something that's going to happen to us. So that's very important. Even though intellectually we can say, yeah, I know I'm going to die. What's the big deal? But that might just be in our head and not really through our entire being and in our life, the way we live our life. We still live our life as if we're going to be here forever. That shows what we're we're not convinced that we're going to die.